left to freeze, music with a note. "No one's child," the rancher said. "You're mine now. You're mine now." Meaningful impact. The winter came down hard that year, not loud, not sudden, clear's throat. It arrived the way grief does, quietly, without asking permission, and then it stayed. Snow had been falling since before dawn, thick as wool, swallowing fence lines and burying roads that had once pretended to lead somewhere. The world was reduced to two colors, white and the dark shape stubborn enough to remain. Trees stood like sentinels with bowed heads. The sky hung low, heavy as if it might collapse under its own cold. Ethan Cole rode through it alone. He had learned long ago that winter did not reward company. Horses breathed louder, thoughts grew heavier. Men talked too much just to hear something alive. So Ethan kept to himself, reins loose in his gloved hands, coat pulled tight, beard crusted with ice where his breath froze and refused to fall. The ranch sat another mile south, but something had pulled at him, an unease that did not belong to the weather. He slowed his horse near the old service road that no one used anymore. Snow had filled it in, erased the lie that it still mattered. That was when he saw the shape. At first he thought it was debris, a sack torn loose, a drift piled wrong. Winter made liars of the eyes, but his horse stopped on its own, ears pinned forward, breath stuttering. Ethan followed the line of its gaze. There, against a fence post half swallowed by snow, was something small, too still, too deliberate. He dismounted, boots crunching, the sound sharp in the hush. Every step closer peeled away denial. The shape was wrapped in layers, old burlap, threadbare cloth, something that might once have been a blanket. Snow had crusted along the edges, sealing it in place. A child. Ethan's chest tightened the way it had the day his wife was lowered into frozen ground 3 winters back. Same air, same silence, same sense that the world had overstepped. He knelt, fingers stiff as he brushed snow from a small shoulder. The child did not move. For a terrible moment he thought winter had already won. Then, barely, there was a sound, not a cry, not even a breath. Just a thin, broken whimper, broken like air trying to remember its job. "Easy," Ethan said, though he didn't know who he was talking to. His voice sounded wrong in the open, like it didn't belong out here anymore. He pulled back the burlap from the child's face. A girl, maybe 6, maybe 7. Her lashes were white with frost. Her lips were blue, cracked, trembling faintly. One mitten was missing. The exposed hand was red and stiff, curled in on itself like it had tried to hold on to something and failed. Tied to the fence post above her head was a scrap of paper weighed down by a nail driven too deep. Ethan didn't want to read it. He already knew what it would say. Winter always carried messages like this, the kind people left so they wouldn't have to carry guilt themselves. Still, his eyes went there. No one's child. The words were uneven, written in charcoal or ash. No name, no explanation, just a declaration, a dismissal, as if saying it made it true. Ethan's jaw set hard. He reached up and tore the note down, crumpling it in his fist until the paper tore and bit into his skin. "That's a lie," he said, low and certain. The girl stirred when he lifted her. She was frighteningly light, like the cold had already begun its work of erasing. Her body was rigid, fighting even in half-unconsciousness, small fingers clutching weakly at his coat as if unsure whether he was real. "It's all right," he murmured, pulling her against his chest, wrapping her in what warmth he had left. "I've got you." Her forehead burned even through the layers. Fever under frost, a cruel balance winter liked to strike. Ethan moved fast then. No more thinking, no more weighing consequences. He mounted with care, holding her close, turning his horse south toward the ranch that had known only one heartbeat for too long. The ride back blurred into breath and snow and the steady drum of hooves. He didn't remember dismounting, only the door flying open, the sudden shocking warmth of inside, the smell of wood and old coffee, and the life he thought had already passed him by. He laid her on the table near the stove, stripped off his gloves, hands shaking now that the urgency had somewhere to land. He wrapped her in blankets, layered and tight, then stoked the fire until it roared like it was angry at the cold for touching her. She whimpered again, eyes fluttering open, dark eyes too old for her face, fear sitting there like it had paid rent. "Hey," Ethan said softly. He dipped a cloth into warm water and pressed it to her lips. Small sips, that's it. She obeyed on instinct, swallowing with effort. Her gaze never left his face. "It's just me," he went on, though he didn't know why that should mean anything. "You're safe here." Safe was a word people used when they wanted to believe something. Ethan knew that, but he said it anyway. He worked slowly, methodically, the way you do when you're afraid one wrong move might shatter what little hope is left. He rubbed warmth into her hands, checked her feet for frostbite, counted her breaths. Outside, the wind howled, angry at being shut out. When she finally slept, it wasn't peaceful. Her body jerked with the dream she was too young to carry. Ethan sat beside her long after the fire settled, staring at the small rise and fall of her chest like it was the only proof left that the world hadn't completely lost its way. Near midnight, he unfolded the scrap of paper again, smoothing it out on the table. No one's child. He stared at the words until they blurred. Then he folded the paper carefully and fed it to the fire. The flames took it without hesitation. Ethan looked back at the girl, small and breathing and alive against all the odds winter had stacked. He stood, pulled another chair close, and sat where she could see him when she woke. "You're not alone anymore," he said into the quiet, the words settling into the walls, the beams, the long empty spaces of the house. "You hear me?" The fire crackled in answer. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something forgotten began to thaw. Morning did not arrive gently. It came with a pale, aching light that pressed through the frost-laced windows like a question that refused to be ignored. The fire had burned low some time before dawn, leaving behind a quiet chill that crept along the floorboards and settled into the bones. Ethan woke in the chair beside the table, neck stiff, hands numb where they still hovered too close to the girl's blanket. For one terrible second, he forgot why he was there. Then he heard her breathing, thin, uneven, but present. Relief washed through him so fast it made his vision blur. He leaned forward, placing two fingers lightly against her wrist, the way he'd learned years ago when the world still gave him reasons to worry about other people. A pulse fluttered beneath his touch, weak but stubborn like her. The girl stirred as if she sensed him watching. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding them before fear rushed in to take its place. She tried to sit up and cried out, a sharp sound cut short by pain and cold. "Hey, easy," Ethan said, quickly standing. "You're all right. Don't move yet." She shrank back instinctively, small hands clutching the blanket, eyes darting around the room as if mapping exits. Her gaze landed on the door and lingered there, panic tightening her small face. Ethan stepped back, giving her space. He remembered that look, the way it hollowed a person out. "You're in my house," he said gently. "No one's coming for you." Last part, he realized, could sound like comfort or threat. He hoped she heard it the right way. She didn't answer. Her lips parted, but no words came. Only breath, quick and shallow. "That's all right," he added. "You don't have to talk." He moved to the stove, poured water into a tin cup, and warmed it until steam rose. When he turned back, she was watching him closely, every movement tracked with the focus of someone who had learned that details mattered. He knelt again, holding the cup out but not forcing it. Small sips. She hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers. The cup rattled slightly against her teeth as she drank. Some spilled down her chin, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand, embarrassed. Ethan pretended not to notice. When she finished, she pulled the blanket tighter around herself like it was the only thing keeping her together. Outside, the wind scraped along the walls. Snow continued its quiet work of erasing. Ethan studied her more carefully now that the worst of the danger had passed. Dirt smudged her cheeks. There was a faint bruise along her jaw, yellowed at the edges, not fresh but not old enough to forget. Her clothes were mismatched, too thin, too big, patched and repatched until the original fabric was just a memory. No child dressed like that by accident. "You hungry?" he asked. Her eyes flicked up at the word. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. He brought her a bowl of warm broth thickened with barley and bits of carrot. The smell filled the room, honest and simple. She ate slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure it would stay. Ethan sat across from her, hands wrapped around his own cup, not speaking. He let the silence do what it needed to do. When she finished, she pushed the bowl away and looked at him again, searching. Her mouth opened. "My name," she whispered. The sound of her voice, so small, so unsure, hit him harder than he expected. "That's a good thing to know," he said. "You don't have to tell me yet if you don't want." She shook her head. "Don't remember." The words were barely there, like they might disappear if she spoke any louder. Ethan nodded slowly. Memory was a strange thing. It hid when you needed it most. "That's all right," he said again. He found himself using those words a lot. Maybe he needed them as much as she did. "We'll take our time." She studied his face as if weighing something important. Then quietly she asked, "Why do you help?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked past her to the window, to the white world pressing in, endless and cold. "Because someone should have," he said finally. She accepted that, or at least she didn't argue. The day unfolded slowly. Ethan set her up near the fire with blankets and a pillow, then moved about the house, splitting kindling, checking the roof for snow weight, doing the things that kept a place standing. Every so often he glanced back to make sure she was still there. Every time she was watching him, not afraid now, curious. By afternoon, color had returned to her cheeks. The fever eased its grip, retreating like something that knew it had lost this round. Ethan brought her a clean shirt, one of his old ones, cut down and stitched years ago for reasons he had stopped examining. It hung loose on her small frame, but it was warm. She hesitated before taking it, then whispered, "Thank you." Like the words were precious. When she changed, she did so behind the table, back turned, modest even in trust. Ethan looked away, busied himself with the fee. Later, when the light began to fade, she asked another question. "You alone?" "Yes," he said. Her brows knit together. "Always." He considered lying, then decided not to. For a long time, she nodded as if that made sense, as if loneliness was something she recognized. That night, the storm worsened. Wind slammed against the house, rattling windows, trying to force its way in out. Ethan reinforced the door, added logs to the fire, then settled back into the chair. The girl slept, but fitfully. Every sharp gust made her flinch. Once she cried out in a language he didn't recognize, hands clutching at nothing. Without thinking, Ethan reached out and rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. "It's all right," he murmured. She didn't wake, but her breathing slowed. Hours passed like that. Firelight, wind, the quiet work of staying alive. Near dawn, she stirred again, eyes opening to find him still there. "You didn't leave," she said, not a question. "No," he replied. "I won't." She watched him for a long moment, then whispered, "They said, no one wants me." Ethan's jaw tightened. He leaned closer, making sure she could see him clearly. They were wrong. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded once firmly, as if committing the words to memory. Outside, the storm finally began to break. Snow softened, wind lost its edge. Inside, the house held 2 breaths instead of 1, and for the first time in years, Ethan Cole did not feel like winter had the final say. Winter settled into the ranch like it had decided to stay. The storm passed, but the cold remained, sharp in the mornings, slow and aching in the evenings. Snow packed itself against the fence lines and crept up the barn walls, turning familiar ground into something quieter, more watchful. Days shortened, nights stretched long and thoughtful. The girl grew stronger. It happened in small, almost invisible ways. The way she no longer startled when Ethan shifted his weight, the way she slept through the wind without crying out, the way her hands stopped shaking when she lifted a cup. Ethan noticed everything. He noticed how she liked to sit near the window in the mornings, watching snowfall as if it were telling her a story. How she counted the cracks in the floorboards when she was thinking. How she hummed soft, tuneless sounds that came and went like breath when she thought no one was listening. She still didn't remember her name. Some days she tried. She would close her eyes, brow furrowed, lips moving silently as if searching through a locked room. Then she would shake her head, frustration pinching her small face. "I know I had one," she said once, voice thick with effort. "It was warm." Ethan didn't push. Names came back when they were ready, or they made room for new ones. On the 5th morning after the storm, she surprised him. He was at the table mending a torn glove when she climbed down from the cot on her own. Her steps were careful but steady. She crossed the room, stopping a few feet away, hands clasped in front of her. "Can I help?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "Help with what?" he asked gently. She gestured vaguely at everything, the house, the fire, the world that kept going whether you were ready or not. Ethan considered her pale face, the strength that was returning but hadn't fully arrived. "You can stir the pot," he said, "if you like." Her eyes lit up, cautious excitement flickering there. He showed her how to hold the spoon, how to move slow so nothing spilled. She took the task seriously, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. That was the first day the house sounded different. Not louder, just fuller. As the weeks passed, she learned the rhythms of the ranch the way one learns a language, by listening first. She helped feed the chickens, scattering grain with careful precision. She learned which floorboards creaked and which stayed quiet. She followed Ethan at a distance when he worked outside, not in the way of a shadow, but like someone memorizing the shape of safety. Sometimes he caught her watching his hands, how they worked, how they studied, how they never struck in anger. Once, when he nicked his finger on a nail and cursed under his breath, she ran to fetch a cloth without being asked. "You're bleeding," she said, worry sharp in her voice. "I've had worse," he replied. She didn't look convinced. One evening, as the sun bled out behind the hills and the sky turned the color of old steel, Ethan found her standing by the fence line. Snow dusted her boots. Her breath puffed white in the air. "You shouldn't be out here long," he said. "It's cold." She nodded but didn't move. "I was left like this," she said suddenly. Ethan went still. "Like what?" he asked carefully. She pointed to the fence post, the spot where he'd found her, the place Winter had tried to claim. "They tied the note," she continued. "I couldn't read it, but I knew it wasn't good." Ethan swallowed. "You don't have to remember that." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I want to." They stood there in the quiet, snow creaking beneath their boots, the past hovering between them like breath held too long. "They said," she went on, "that no one would come, that winter would be faster." Ethan knelt so he was level with her. His voice was firm, certain. They were wrong. She studied his face, searching for cracks. Finding none, she nodded. That night she dreamed less. One morning, not long after, Ethan brought out a small wooden box. He set it on the table between them, sliding it toward her. "What's this?" she asked. "Something that belonged to someone who mattered to me," he said. "I think it's yours now." Inside was a small carving, a bird, wings outstretched, simple, worn smooth by time and touch. Her fingers closed around it instantly as if they recognized it before her mind could. "It flies," she whispered. "Yes," Ethan said, "even in winter." She held it close, pressing it against her chest like a promise. Later that day, while Ethan repaired a loose hinge on the barn, she followed him out, wrapped in a thick coat. She watched quietly for a while, then asked, "What should I call you?" He paused, hammer midair. "Ethan." She tried it out softly. "Ethan?" The name settled easily on her tongue. "And you?" he asked, heart thudding harder than he expected. She hesitated, then slowly, "I don't know." "That's all right," he said. "We can find one together." She thought for a long time. Snowflakes landed in her hair and melted there, unbothered. "I like winter birds," she said finally. "They stay." Ethan smiled faintly. "They do, maybe." "Wren," she suggested, uncertain. The name hovered between them. "Wren," Ethan repeated. She nodded, a shy smile tugging at her lips. Wren. That night, when the wind howled and the fire cracked, Ethan tucked her in and sat beside her until sleep claimed her fully. "You're not no one's child," he said quietly, brushing hair from her forehead. "You're mine now." The words surprised him with their weight, with their truth. Outside, winter pressed in. Inside, something stronger than cold took root. And for the first time since the world had broken in two, Ethan Cole allowed himself to believe that some things once found were never meant to be left behind. Winter does not leave all at once. It waits, it circles, it watches what you build when you think you're safe. The ranch had settled into a fragile kind of peace. Wren laughed now, soft, surprise sounds that startled her as much as they did Ethan. She learned how to mend seams, how to gather eggs without flinching, how to stand near the fire without feeling like it might turn on her. The house had learned her footsteps. The silence no longer swallowed them. That was when winter decided to remember them. It began with tracks. Ethan saw them just after dawn, half hidden beneath a dusting of fresh snow. Boot prints, 2 sets, adult, heavy, deliberate. They didn't belong to the ranch. They didn't belong to yesterday. He crouched near the fence line, fingers brushing the edge of one print. Recent, whoever made them hadn't bothered to hide. His stomach tightened. Inside, Wren was humming while she swept the floor. The sound cut off the moment Ethan stepped in. She saw his face and knew. "What is it?" she asked. "We're not alone," he said. She went very still. "Are they the ones?" "I don't know," he replied honestly, "but I don't like the way they walk." He moved quickly then, the way a man does when decisions are already made. He loaded his rifle, checked the spare, slid a knife into his boot. He showed Wren where to hide behind the false wall near the pantry, the space he'd built years ago for reasons he never thought he'd need again. "If anyone comes," he said, kneeling to her level, "you stay quiet no matter what you hear." Her eyes searched his face. "You'll come back?" "Yes," he said, and meant it with every part of himself. "I promise." She nodded, clutching the small wooden bird he'd given her. He pressed his forehead briefly to hers, then closed the panel behind her. The knock came an hour later, not a polite one, not a hesitant one. 3 sharp raps, heavy enough to shake the door in its frame. Ethan opened it with his rifle leaning casually against the wall, posture relaxed but ready. 2 men stood outside, long coats, hard eyes, the kind of faces Winter carved without asking permission. One smiled without warmth. "Morning," the taller one said. "We're looking for a child." Ethan didn't blink. Lots of children in the world. "This one's special," the man continued. "Left out here with a note." Ethan felt something go cold behind his ribs. "You're mistaken." The second man stepped forward. "We know she's here." Silence stretched tight and brittle. "No," Ethan said. The taller man sighed like he was disappointed but not surprised. "You could have stayed out of it." Ethan's grip tightened. "You already did." The man lunged. The sound of the rifle shot split the morning clean in 2. Birds scattered. Snow leapt from the roof in a white rush. The second man bolted. Ethan fired again, catching him in the leg. He went down hard, screaming into the snow. The taller one staggered back, blood blooming dark against his coat. He stared at Ethan, shock giving way to fury. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed. Ethan advanced slowly. "I know exactly what I'm doing." The man collapsed before Ethan reached him, breath leaving in a wet rattle. The other dragged himself backward, panic wide in his eyes. "She's worth money," he gasped. "People pay to erase problems." Ethan's jaw clenched. He raised the rifle. "No," he said. "People like you do." When it was over, the snow around the house was trampled and stained. Winter watched without comment. Ethan buried the bodies far from the fence line, deeper than frost reached. He burned what needed burning. When he returned inside, the house smelled like smoke and fear. He opened the hidden panel. Wren rushed into his arms, shaking. "You came back," she whispered. He held her tightly, one hand cradling her head, the other pressed to her back like he could anchor her to the world. "It's done," he said. "They won't come again." She nodded against his chest, but he could feel the tremor still running through her. That night the wind returned, not loud, just enough to remind them it existed. Wren couldn't sleep. Ethan sat with her, the fire low, shadows long on the walls. She traced the grain of the table with one finger, thinking. "They wanted to take me," she said quietly. "Yes, because I was left." "No," Ethan said firmly, "because some people think what's abandoned belongs to them." She considered that. "But you didn't." "No," he repeated, "because they were wrong." She looked up at him then, eyes serious beyond her years. "If I hadn't been there, would you still be alone?" The question landed heavier than any blow. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I'm not now. She leaned into him, small and warm, a defiance against the cold that had tried to take her twice. Winter pressed its face to the windows, listening. It did not get in. By morning, the snow had covered the tracks. The world pretended nothing had happened. But inside the house, something had shifted, not broken, reinforced. Wren helped make breakfast, her movement steadier than before. She asked fewer questions, but the ones she did ask cut deeper. Will winter ever stop? She asked. Ethan thought of the men, the note, the way cold returned when you least expected it. No, he said, but it doesn't always win. She smiled at that, small, certain. Outside, the sun climbed, pale and stubborn. Inside, a promise held, and winter, for all its patience, had lost something it could not take back. Spring did not arrive the way stories promised. There was no sudden warmth, no grand melting that erased winter in a single breath. Instead, the cold loosened its grip slowly, like a fist that had grown tired of holding on. Snow retreated inch by inch, revealing ground that looked unsure of itself, dark and damp and scarred where it had been frozen too long. Ethan watched it happen from the porch, coffee cooling in his hands. Behind him, Wren sat on the steps, knees tucked to her chest, counting droplets as snowmelt slid from the roof. She had learned patience from winter. She did not rush the world anymore. Is it over? She asked. Ethan considered the land, the sky, the way the wind still carried a bite even when the sun dared to show itself. No, he said gently, but it's changing. She accepted that answer the way she accepted most things now, not with fear, but with quiet understanding. They buried the past properly once the ground softened enough to allow it. Not the men, not the violence. Those were already gone, returned to silence where they belonged. What Ethan buried was the note. He had kept the torn scrap of it in a tin box beneath his bed, not because he needed it, but because some wounds healed better when they were acknowledged. Wren watched as he dug, the bird carving clutched in her hands. When the hole was deep enough, Ethan placed the box inside and covered it with earth, tamping it down until it disappeared into the ground like it had never existed. That's not true anymore, Wren said softly. No, Ethan agreed. It never was. Life resumed, not as it had been, but as it could be. Wren learned to read with an old book Ethan's wife had once loved, her finger tracing letters as if they were stepping stones across a river. She stumbled at first, then studied, delight blooming each time a word revealed itself. Ethan watched from the table, pretending to fix something just so he could listen. She learned the land, too, which paths flooded first, where the ground stayed warm longest, where winter birds nested even when the cold returned. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in colors that didn't know how to be sad, Wren asked, "Will I always be Wren?" Ethan looked at her, really looked, at the strength in her posture, at the calm in her eyes, at the way she fit into the space she occupied like she had always belonged there. "You can be whoever you choose," he said, "but that name suits you." She smiled, content. Weeks later, a letter arrived. It bore the mark of the county office, the kind of thing Ethan hadn't opened in years without bracing himself. He read it twice before calling Wren over. "What is it?" she asked, peering at the paper. "It says," he replied carefully, "that if I want, I can make things official." Her eyes widened. "Official? How?" He took a breath. "It says I can be your guardian legally." She didn't answer right away. She looked around the house, the walls, the table, the fire that had warmed her through the worst nights of her life. She looked out the window at the land that no longer felt endless in a frightening way. Then she looked back at him. "You already are," she said. Something tight loosened in Ethan's chest. He nodded. "Still," he added, "it might matter someday." She stepped closer, sliding her hand into his, small, warm, certain. "Then yes," she said. They signed the papers a week later in town. No ceremony, no witnesses who mattered, just ink and names and a quiet understanding that some bonds didn't need applause. On the ride home, Wren leaned against him, her head resting easily where fear used to live. "Ethan," she asked, "thank you for finding me." He swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Thank you for staying." The seasons turned as they always did. Summer brought green to the hills and laughter to the house. Fall followed, gold and honest, preparing the land for rest. And then, inevitably, winter came again. But this time it was different. The house held its warmth. The fire was always ready. The silence was shared, not empty. When snow fell, Wren pressed her face to the window and smiled instead of shrinking away. One night, as the wind howled outside like it remembered old arguments, Wren curled beside Ethan by the fire. "Winter can't take me now," she said, not bravely but truthfully. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "No," he said, "it can't." Outside, the cold did what it always did, tested, waited, returned. Inside, something stronger had already taken root. And long after the snow fell and melted and fell again, the ranch stood as quiet proof of something the world tried very hard to forget, that being found is not a matter of chance. Sometimes it is a choice, and once made, it changes.